Welcome to everyone, wherever you are and whatever time of the day it is for you. Thank you very much for joining us in this webinar organized by the International Science Council as a contribution to the high-level political forum. My name is Mathieu Denis. I am Science Director of the International Science Council, and I have the privilege of moderating our discussion today. The high-level political forum this year focuses on what can probably be regarded as the most urgent challenge facing our communities, our societies, our governments today. Namely, how do we create pathways towards sustainable ways of living? How do we collectively transform our economies, transform the ways in which we exploit natural resources, transform our cities, etc., to achieve sustainability? And so in the next hour, we want to explore that civilizational challenge by zooming in on the design and implementation of pathways towards transformations. In other words, we will be talking about things like, what do we mean by transformations? How do societies create their pathways to transformations? And we'll be talking about the knowledge, the science that is needed to foster transformations. Colleagues, the context of our discussion today is conditioned by COVID-19, and I don't think anyone needs to be convinced of the dramatic impact that the ongoing pandemic already has on our communities, our economies, governments, and a lot indicates that this impact and pressure on societies will increase significantly in the coming months. And so today we also want to be looking at the early, although already tangible impact of COVID-19 on the development, the implementation of pathways to sustainability. Clearly, these are big questions, but we've brought together a group of experts to help us think through some of them. And I will therefore ask now all speakers to please turn on their cameras. Hi. So today we'll have first Professor Melissa Leach talking to us. She's a director of the Institute of Development Studies at Sussex University. We also have Professor Katherine Richardson, a member of the independent group of scientists for the 2019 Global Sustainable Development Report, which puts to the fore a very powerful transformative agenda for countries. And Katherine teaches and does research at the Sustainability Science Center at University of Copenhagen. We have Dr. Leena Srivastava, Deputy Director General for Science at the International Institute for Applied System Analysis in Austria. We have Professor Gong, the President of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, and Dr. Shantanu Mukherjee, Chief of the Policy Analysis Branch Division for Sustainable Development of UN-DESA. Now, each of the speakers will share a few thoughts for about 4 or 5 minutes each, and after they're all done, we will open up the floor for questions by the audience. Now, just a few technical issues, considerations. If you want to raise a question, please type it into the question box, and we will take them, as I said, in the second part of this event. And let me also notify everyone right at the beginning that this session is recorded and that the recording will be made available on several platforms in the coming days. So I would like to start now by inviting Melissa Leach to share some thoughts about what are transformations and how they can be directed towards desired outcomes. Melissa, please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Whoops. Hang on. Wait a minute. So sorry. Good. So can you see my slides all right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking today about transformations, and in the vision that my colleagues and I share with our partners around the world at the Institute of Development Studies, those transformations need to be towards a more equitable and sustainable world. We're talking about equity and sustainability, social justice, and living well within our planetary limits. And we want everyone everywhere to be able to live lives that are free from poverty and free from injustice. So that, I think, is one vision of where transformations need to be going. And I think we're all aware that that requires big change, but it's also change that's taking place in a context of disruption. We are living in an era of ruptures and of shocks. And this was already the case before COVID. Climate change and environmental shocks, economic and financial shocks, political shocks around the world, social and technological linked to the disruptions of the digital world. These are disruptions that have positive and negative elements. They create havoc, but they also create opportunity. And I think this is where we're at with COVID-19, which has exposed, of course, tremendous vulnerabilities and is causing disaster for health and economies around the world. But in some respects is also, I think, offering some glimmers of opportunity for doing things differently, or to do what some are calling in the aftermath, we hope eventually, of a disaster, not just to build back, but to build back differently, to build back in a transformative way. So transformative pathways, and I very much like the metaphor of pathways, have some qualities to them. They have to take us in particular directions. And in work I've done with colleagues from Future Earth, we've charted the desired directions as to get us into and stay within a space of equitable sustainability. If you like, the Sustainable Development Goals provide a kind of guide, they provide a kind of ring that one wants to get through, which charts out this space. They're a package, they're not individual goals. They're a general guideline, a kind of ring, if you like, that one wants to move through. And maybe we'll have some future goals in the future, but in any case, we're looking at long-term future transformations. So the direction is defined by the space, it's equity and sustainability. We also need to think about the distributive outcomes of those different pathways, who gains and who loses. We need to acknowledge diversity because one size does not fit all, just as we're seeing one size doesn't fit all in the COVID response around the world. So pathways to sustainability need to suit their context, social, political, economic, environmental, and we need a diversity to respect those contexts. And we also need to think about pathways to decide those goals and directions and where they're going in a democratic way, formally and informally. So those are 4 Ds to think about around pathways. There are also many ways of approaching transformation and 3 labels that one might apply to different really ways of seeing the design and the implementation. Each refer to big traditions in social science and in politics of seeing how change happens. So some view transformation as a question of structural change, deep changes in the foundations of politics, of society, of capitalism, needing really radical transformations. And crisis sometimes opens up the opportunity for just that kind of change. Then we can think about systemic transformations or transitions, which is more about those instrumental incentives, policy changes, investments, often led by the state, but in partnership with businesses and others. But this third approach that I call enabling asks some harder questions about the aims and the directions. It challenges often those incumbent interests and controls. It looks to alternatives, including those that come from the bottom up. And I think these are not either ors. I think we can look to design pathways and implementation in ways that draw from each of these approaches and perhaps combine them more holistically. So my final slide then is to acknowledge that transformations are always political. Power came into each of those approaches in the last slide. and power identified and taken forward in different ways. But the power of solidarity and collaboration, I think, has been revealed perhaps most strongly in COVID. And we're here talking about citizens and communities, potentially alliances with states and with businesses, solidarities also across global organizations and networks, and then the collaboration to take that forward across sectors and scales. Just two very small examples would be the ways that green and just new deals are now being proposed as forms of state and business partnership as part of the rebuilding in a moment of building back from COVID. Or to take another arena, transformations in the food system. We're seeing now openings for arguments that have been made for a long time by grassroots and social movements for agroecological and food sovereignty approaches, given new life by the kinds of community and neighbourhood networks which have bubbled up quite spontaneously to help people through COVID, and which now I think together offer us some powerful seeds of transformation in the food system. So if solidarity and collaboration is the word, we need to stop seeing the SDGs as silos. We need to work across sectors. We need to work across levels and scales. And this too is going to require collaboration in our sciences and our knowledges, both to define the directions and design the implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Underlying your presentation, there's the strong, close relationship between sustainability, equity, and therefore questions of power and politics, and therefore the importance, I guess, of insights from social sciences and humanities. Thank you very much for that. Let me now invite, please, Katherine, if you can come back. Invite Katherine Richardson to share some insights about how governments are operationalizing at a national level a transformations framework, such as the one outlined in the 2019 Global Sustainable Development Report. Katherine, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's important, and where it's successful, if you're going to operationalize transformation frameworks at any level, be it national or personal or even global, it's important always to focus on the nexus between people and resources, and that's what some governments are doing. Let me explain this by, I hope I'm going to explain this by showing, make another attendee. How do I show my slides? You can't see my slides, can you? Oh, yes. You can see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Let me explain this by using the SDGs, which I actually believe should be together, that they form a vision for how we want to share the Earth's limited resources among all the people on this planet. And the SDGs that have with people, that are about people, the ones about poverty, food, health, and so on, actually all come with costs on our global environmental commons, that is to say, climate and biodiversity. But sustainability is found somewhere in here between these two extremes. We don't know exactly where we want to be on that arrow, but we do know that if we are too close to protecting the environment, there won't be any room for humanity to develop. On the other hand, if we're too far down here, then we risk losing the natural capital that's paying for the party. And we know, because we did in our group last year, an assessment of where we are on all the SDGs, and all of the SDGs up here, all of the people ones, or all of the global common ones, are actually, the trend is negative. Many of the ones down here are going forward, but the trend above is all negative. And we all know the party can continue for a long time, even if the bank account is on its way down, but sooner or later the party's going to stop unless you can change that. So we need to relieve the pressure that there is right now for improving human well-being at the cost of the environmental commons. So we need to have the focus on people and resources. How efficiently are the resources used? And most importantly, how are they shared? And that links, that brings in 10 over here, that actually links these two goals. Now, those of you who are still with me will see that we don't have all the SDGs on this table yet. The rest of the SDGs can all be, oh dear, this doesn't seem to be showing the next slide. Why is it not? Are you seeing a new slide?
No, not yet.
Well, okay, well, on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, we're supposed to be getting all the other SDGs in, and these SDGs they're all related to one or more of the four levers that we identify in our report as being important in order to be able to achieve sustainable development. In other words, to relieve the pressure between the well-being increase and the resources that we have today, and to change the way we share these resources, both among other people, but also other living organisms. And those four levers that we identified are technology, but technology can't do this alone because it can't make energy, it can't make biodiversity, it can't make phosphorus. So technology can't do it alone. You need also governance, you need to change the economic system, and you need to change behavior. And all of the other SDGs can be associated with one or more of those levers. Now, this is all fine and good, but none of our politicians and the people making a difference at the local level are actually thinking in terms of SDGs. What is it they think in terms of? Well, human well-being is improved by getting food, getting energy, getting water, getting sanitation, getting access to materials for infrastructure and for buying products and so on. So we can translate this framework we have here, so it's not SDGs, it's well-being on the bottom. In the middle, we have our energy system, our food system, and so on. And then we have the global commons above. Now, all of those activities, energy, food, and so on, all take something out of the global commons or put waste into the global commons. Waste, for example, when we worry about climate, it's the greenhouse gas waste that we have, but we also have plastics and we have pesticides and we have lots of different waste coming into the global commons. So we're both taking things. Oh, thank you. So we're both taking things out of the green arrows that you see there are where we take things out. It could be fish, it could be trees, whatever, or it could be oil, it could be gas. And the black arrows are where we are putting waste into the system. Interestingly enough, that orange or yellowish line in the middle with the water and the food and the energy and so on is mostly in the infrastructure there is mostly in private hands. So that's where you have businesses. And yet politicians operate between human prosperity, that is to say us, and the businesses. And where we're really going to win or not win in this agenda of transformation is up there in all those arrows. And if I could have the last slide, please. This is where we need to be focusing. It's on maximizing the human welfare, the increase in human welfare that we get, and minimizing the environmental cost, and also, of course, how we share these resources. So although there's 17 goals, and people always shake their heads when companies or government officials come to me and shake their head and say, I can't deal with 17 goals, I say it's actually really very simple. You only have to focus at cost efficiency. You know what cost efficiency is, but you're used to using it in terms of money. Money isn't our real currency. It's the limited Earth's resources that are real currency, and that's where we have to use cost effectiveness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katherine. The next speaker is Leena Srivastava, who will look at what remains of the transformative agenda in the aftermath of COVID-19, and how can we now design pathways towards recovery that are sustainable and resilient. Leena, please.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I don't know if you can see my screen, probably not.
Yes, yes, we can.
You can, okay, wonderful. So let me just put it on full screen mode and move forward from there. So, yeah, so I just thought I would spend the few minutes that I have to review it once again and actually nicely supplement our first two speakers of this evening and talk about the systemic nature of the changes or transformations that we need to be putting in place. We're all talking about a world which I think simply is called the post-COVID world. And I did want to start by emphasizing that this new normal that we are all speaking of will only be more sustainable if we design it to be more sustainable and not by chance. So I think that's one point that I wanted to make upfront, and wanted to also highlight to you that in this exercise that we are doing along with the International Science Council and IIASA, we basically recognize the fact that when COVID-19 hit us, it caught us all completely unprepared to deal with this pandemic. And the speed with which it covered the entire world and the impacts that it was having. We also found ourselves unprepared to deal with it and to look at the systemic nature of the impacts that COVID-19 was imposing upon us. So to try and see whether we can actually come up with recommendations on how we can bounce back better or build back better as the case is, we decided to focus on 4 sectors, 2 which provide kind of overarching themes which are critical, and these 2 relate to governance and science systems because these were the first responders to the COVID-19. One sector that these or reveals the extreme vulnerabilities that we are facing, which is around food, and one which we thought revealed the potential for transformative change, which is energy. Of course, there are a few other cross-cutting issues that we're looking at, poverty and equity, issues of trust, which I think have come to the fore extremely strongly, data access and privacy as well. For today's discussion, I wanted to focus on energy because I think for meeting the climate agreements and the SDGs, looking at energy consumption is going to be critically important. And we need to be able to give a boost to sustainable energy while reducing our dependence on fossil energy. The response to COVID-19 brought us reductions of fossil energy at an unprecedented level, and actually poised us to ensure that 2020 is indeed the turning point for greenhouse gas emissions, because right now the estimates are between 8 to 10% of reductions of greenhouse gas emissions over last year. So if we are able to bring that curve and keep it down, we do have a chance of being able to meet the Paris agreements. Prior to COVID-19, actually, we were giving up hope on this particular aspect. So the question to us is, how do we keep this momentum going? And more than ever, I think COVID-19 has really revealed to us the need to have the systemic approach, and my next slide will really talk about the systemic approach. So what were the changes that were put in place? Governments, as you are well aware, acted with great resolve to try and contain this COVID-19, and communities, people, civil society came together again very strongly to lend support to the government in reducing the impacts of COVID-19. So what were these changes that took place, and how did they have an impact on the energy sector? Critical amongst them is the work from home kind of functioning that we were talking about, which resulted in a reduced demand for transport, reductions in urban congestion, stress, and a significant reduction in fossil energy consumption. In the case of the transportation fuels, we are seeing almost an 80 to 85% reduction in consumption or demand, and that is huge. What we've also experienced is a shift to a service-oriented economy with online delivery of services, with mobility also moving to a service base, of course, hopefully clean energy based. We are looking at shared localized meeting spaces, workspaces to address some of the challenges of work from home. And of course, there is a call for decentralized, localized energy services and delivery as well. And all of these would have a significant impact on jobs, because that's the other, it's a quality of our systems that has been revealed. To be able to function in this manner, we need to reimagine our urban spaces. We need to see how we can enhance community activities, because one of the biggest concerns that is coming up is that if we move to a more digital economy and digitalized world, how do we network? How do we build relationships? How do we build the bonds that are so critically important to keep our activity levels going? So how do you enhance community activities? How do you enhance non-motorized transport to be able to offset the impacts of reductions in mobility that we have experienced? And there are several cities where we already have examples where a lot is being done to reshape the transport systems. We need a redeployment of commercial spaces and, of course, efficiency in the choices of residences, such that the crisscrossing that you typically see in urban cities leading to a lot of congestion and pollution can be avoided. We have experienced a number of lifestyle changes. Almost every person that you speak to, even not dealing in the sectors that we deal with, speak about the reduced material demand, speak about, I said vehicle ownership, although the COVID-19 crisis has increased the demand for vehicles in the immediate term, but I expect that in the longer term we should be able to see a change in this, and possibly a lower demand for construction. So I've got just thing in front of me that I'm trying to brush it out. So for all these levers of change to continue to support them, we need a framework, which is going to enable all the positives to continue while we address the priorities. We have to empower cities and local governments to act as per the interests that they have and as per the local context. We have to unleash private investments in support of all the actions that we spoke about earlier. There has to be a complete revamp of our institutions and the regulatory frameworks for businesses, for education, for land use, and be what may. I think these are changes that will have to be put in place. We need systems of incentives, disincentives. We need to be moving towards a sharing economy. We need to move away from ownership models to maybe rental or sharing models, and we have to see what we can do to contain the bouncing back of travel demand. Digital access and skill development is going to be critical to protect the vulnerable people. They have to be provided access to financial services, and social protection in general has to be strengthened across all sectors of the economy. So in sum, I think the recovery packages that we are talking about will not only have to be systematically designed and targeted, but these will also have to use transdisciplinary approaches and demonstrate a policy coherence at a level that we have not seen earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leena, and apologies for the sound quality, which was not great, but at the same time, your slides allowed us to follow very neatly what you were saying. Interesting that the transdisciplinary approach and the notion of participation comes out so strongly as well in a systems analysis-based approach. Thank you, Leena. Our next speaker is Professor Gong, who will now do an interesting exercise as he will unpack for us one of the entry points for transformations proposed by the 2019 Global Sustainable Development Report, namely the entry point of the urban and peri-urban development. So, Professor Gonke, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, have you seen my screen?
Yes, we can see it very well.
So I just want to use a few minutes to show an example of integration of geospatial technology with building information model to show how science and technology leverages urban sustainable development. And why urban sustainable development? Because in the last year's the global sustainable development report, it is pointed out that urban and peri-urban development is identified as one of the 6 entry points that for the sustainable transformations. So let me good. Can you see my slides?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It is stated the sustainable cities are central to achieve. Oh, where is my slides? The sustainable development, the sustainable cities are essential to achieve all 17 sustainable development goals, because if the current trends continue, by 2050 cities will contain approximately 70% of the world population and produce 85% of global economic output. However, all problems related to sustainable development, such as poverty, hunger, healthcare, education, equality, energy, water, and so on and so forth, are all concentrated in cities. And the universities, research institutes, big companies are also concentrated in cities. Therefore, it is stated by the report, cities can become sustainable development leaders and laboratories for the world at large. So, response to the Global Sustainable Development Report, the World Federation of Engineering Organizations worked with the UNGGIM, that stands for the Global Geospatial Information Management, and the WGIC, that is the World Geospatial Industry Council. We worked together, released a white paper to show an example of how the lever of science and technology on the entry point of urban development. This report briefly introduces the fourth industrial revolution technologies and analyzes the needs of resilient infrastructure, elaborates the geospatial and building information model solution, and gives insights by 11 cases. The paper also addresses the challenges of the adaptation of the model and make recommendations for the way forward. The paper shows the integration of the geospatial technology and show that this integration provide a multiple scale models supporting the supporting the resilient infrastructure. What's wrong?
Gonka, I think you've lost your presentation, but perhaps you can
lost my presentation.
To your conclusion, perhaps.
Yes, that shows the infrastructure, resilient infrastructure is focused on this paper. But to reach a people-centric, smart, resilient, inclusive city, we need more works. We hope our work is part of the more comprehensive so-called urban sciences and engineering, and that needs more collaboration, international and multidisciplinary collaboration. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gonke. Without waiting longer, I would like to now invite our final speaker, Dr. Shantanu Mukherjee, to share his views on the science we need for the SDGs in the context of the global pandemic and its aftermath. Dr. Mukherjee, please. Your microphone is off, Shantanu. Yeah.
Yes, okay, thank you, Matthew. Now, of course, in September 2019, when the Global Sustainable Development Report was actually launched, it seemed to be the best of times for science for sustainability. And here we are now in the middle of COVID, and it may just well appear to be the worst of times. Science is more important than ever, more widely recognized to be so, but we are also seeing in sharp relief the challenges it faces in inspiring action. Now, all of you are familiar with the GSDR and the priorities it lays out based on the possibilities for transformative action. But here I want to get a step away from that and emphasize, pick up on the points it emphasized in how the working of scientists for sustainability needs to change to advance these transformations. And it made 3 points. One was about interdisciplinarity. The second was about having a solutions orientation. And the third was about addressing inequalities through science, but also in how we do science through enabling the full contribution of women and participation of researchers in developing countries. So the question I want to explore today is, are we learning anything from our experience with COVID-19 around these issues? And a simple point, of course, is that all of these are just as important, if anything, more so than ever. But I believe the pandemic also brings into sharp focus some of the long-standing challenges that science has faced in advancing action towards sustainability. And I believe that what we are seeing now and learning from can help with practical approaches and a shared purpose towards resolving some of these. So my presentation is going to be organized around 5 key takeaways that I think we should consider. The first point is about strengthening capacities for science-based decision-making at all levels in government. Now, let's face it, the coronavirus has been a stress test for this aspect of governments across all countries, not just the ones that have had weak institutional systems. I think researchers in sustainability will recognize some of these. Even across countries that have well-established institutional structures, we've seen tremendous differences in how the scientific guidance is received and operationalized. Some of this is rooted in long-standing deficiencies, for example, not having timely data or not actually understanding the need for it, or viewing the pandemic as an either-or choice between lives and livelihoods, rather than taking a more integrated, interdisciplinary approach, as Katherine put forward. But, and this is my second point, we also see a broader and equally long-standing issue, that of public trust in science. In general, global surveys find this to be high, but there are considerable differences across groups and across countries. But I believe the pandemic also presents examples of what exactly is going on. And again, researchers in sustainability will be familiar with these. One, of course, is that the scientific knowledge and the guidance based on it is evolving, and that has to be communicated so that it doesn't come across as experts changing their minds all the time. The second, more serious perhaps, is what the WHO calls the infodemic, incorrect and potentially damaging information that's deliberately advanced through social media or other platforms. I believe these only underscore the need for a longer-term, sustained, and more effective science-based engagement, not just between scientists and policymakers or scientists and the private sector, but with all of society. A deliberate effort to engage with the skeptics, not necessarily from positions of authority, but rather from one that invites collaboration. The third point I would like to make is that the pace of research into solutions around COVID has speeded up through sharing knowledge and data for collaborative research. It's only that way that we can say that the vaccine development time stands to be shortened to 12 to 18 months from the typical period of several years. Peer-reviewed journals have dropped their paywalls and speeded up the peer review process. And this kind of open access actually promotes what the GSDR was getting at, which is more global collaboration, including with researchers in developing countries. At the same time, results that are rushed into circulation and later turn out to be incorrect or misinterpreted can lower credibility and inflict harm and further erode trust in science. We therefore need to evolve norms and good practices so that we can maintain this acceleration of positive results while eliminating the negative. The fourth point I think we stand to learn from COVID is about the importance of ensuring universal access to solutions. The GSDR emphasized that 60% of research spending happens in the private sector, indirectly reflecting the importance of innovation in producing private goods. But the coronavirus is emphasizing that solutions to shared challenges are also in the nature of public goods. And I think it's well understood by economists that relying solely on the market makes the innovation for these unacceptably slow. So how we deal with the production of vaccines and treatments, roll them out rapidly and make them available to all will be important harbingers of how we succeed with solutions for climate and other sustainability challenges. Finally, a nod really quickly from my position in DESA, a nod to the global scientific assessments. These are powerful ways of demonstrating consensus, but falter at how they are translated into action. They promote advocacy and they look great on CVs, I have to admit, but they don't necessarily motivate engagement with a greater group of actors who will actually get things done. The GSDR has had some success here, and I think this is something we need to build upon. I do think these 5 areas of work bring into focus opportunities for science to transform our journey to sustainable development. And as I end, I would return to Dickens as I began, hoping that our experience with COVID helps usher in an age of wisdom, even as we overcome an age of foolishness. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this, Shantanu. Can I now invite all speakers to please switch on their cameras as we move towards the period of questions. Well, first of all, let me thank you all for your insights and comments, and I will go to all of you and try to perhaps raise questions, but please try and be as synthetic as you can. And I would like to start, with you, Melissa, because I think in a way you have a privileged position in this discussion, in the sense that you've done a lot of work on transformations, obviously, but you've also worked on pandemics. You've worked on Ebola. Now you're working on COVID, and I don't know if you could share with us your views on how a moment like this, a health crisis like this, can help us clarify how deep social change occurs and what forms transformations might actually take in today's world.
Well, I think there are 3 things I'd flag there. One is the importance of bottom-up community response preparedness from below. And this was what eventually turned the West African Ebola epidemic around. And I think it will be localized solutions supported by governments and the international world that ultimately deals with the public health crisis of COVID and actually helps very much in the building back of effective economies and livelihoods. So I would really stress the importance of the bottom up, of local knowledge as crucial. Secondly, I think the social is really crucial. So epidemics are always social phenomena. Yes, they're about viruses, but viruses only spread through social patterns of interaction between people in families. In the case of COVID, large gatherings, religious gatherings, travel, cruise ships, we've seen it all in different countries. And that's why, more than anything, they demand interdisciplinarity of knowledges which which can help us understand those things, which bring together the epidemiology, the mathematical modeling, the vaccine science, the diagnostics, with the social knowledge from anthropology, geography, demography, that can actually both help understand why viruses are spreading and then design responses to them. And then the third issue is not about responding to a public health crisis. It is about the way that a crisis of any kind, and an epidemic here is not unlike the financial crisis of 2007-8, or the creeping climate crisis, which is causing many mini crises of extreme weather events and so on in different parts of the world. These are openings. They throw things up in the air. They create the chance to disrupt incumbent power relations and bring in new ways of doing things. And I think, as Leena and Katherine both said, that doesn't happen automatically. The changes that are ushered in can be negative, but they can also be positive. And I think we saw that with Ebola. We saw a chance to rebuild health systems, which was not taken, and it didn't happen. And we're there where we are in West Africa around this crisis. I think it would be a travesty if the opportunity to build back better in health, in resilience, in responses, in economic and social systems that work better for people and for non-human nature were not seized at this particular moment.
A lot of what you're saying, Melissa, makes raise or highlights the particular role of power, and indeed during your presentation, you've said transformation is always about power. I'd like to turn to Katherine because in your presentation, where you've identified 4 levels, technology, governance, economy, and behavior. And in the discussion that followed, you've made little reference to power, as one of our member in the audience noted. And so it would be interesting to hear you talk a little bit about where you locate power dynamics in the transformative model that you've presented. And we can perhaps add a dimension to that question, which is that for many years, perhaps 2 or 3 decades, policy making seemed to have lost a lot of its capacity for action. Now, COVID in a way seems to have reaffirmed the role of policy making in many areas, and also in areas which has seemed to have fallen out of its realm in previous years. So can we also say that there is something of an empowering moment for national states, for governments?
Yeah, I think those are very good questions. The levers that I think deal with power that we identified are governance and economic. And I think what you referred to in the last year, that things have been changing, it has been the economic system which has been more powerful than the governance system, and that's why we play with these two. And I think the balance, COVID is maybe changing the balance a little bit at this point between, so that economy is losing some of its power at the moment and the political side is getting more power. The problem, I think, in terms of sustainable development is the fact that we're trying to develop mechanisms to share global resources, and we don't have a global governance, and we don't want a global governance. So we have to look at the fact that it's not only politicians that form governance, it's also ourselves and businesses, the way businesses deal with the resources that they're in contact with, what the consumer is asking for. I mean, we talk about, and you were getting very close to in your talk with Melissa about what causes social tipping points. We know what natural science tipping points are, with melting all ice on Greenland and so on, but there are also social tipping points, and they can be triggered by technology when we move from horses to driving cars, or they can be triggered by expectations and values in society. Think about smoking and how smoking became suddenly, I mean, it's very much our smoking rules are governed not only by politicians, but our expectations to one another. So I think we do acknowledge power in our levers there, and that both governance and the economic system both have a good deal of power to give evidence of how much power the economic system has. We made in our report last year, the GSDR, a table that shows the 100 richest entities on this planet, including countries and including businesses. And fully 25% of the richest entities are companies that depend on fossil fuels. Why is it that we're not able to go to Paris and say we're going to phase out fossil fuels and at the same time get rid of subsidies to fossil fuels? Because the economic system has power.
It raises, I mean, thank you very much, Katherine, for this. I mean, it clearly in what we're hearing now, there's the question of the articulation between scales, articulation between levels, and what is global, what is national, obviously what is local. And here the phrase that we all know we've heard, many times is, think global, act local. It seems to me though that more and more what is required and what we see emerging are people thinking and acting global local. They are approaching the realities at their different layers, which is one way of approaching the context dependency. But the other way, obviously, is to say that what works, and I think, Melissa, you mentioned that, and I would like Leena to perhaps reflect a little bit on that. What does it imply to say that pathways need to be context dependent if we acknowledge that global trends need to be locally understood and acted upon locally? So how do pathways become, if you want, globally cumulative but locally relevant? And I don't know, Leena, if that's something that you can perhaps address a little bit.
Well, let me try, because and I'll use the example of the energy sector itself to try and illustrate that particular point. I mean, so we have all been talking about moving away from fossil fuels and enhancing the role of renewable energy, and I think there is a great opportunity for us to do that today, precisely for the reasons that Katherine mentioned as well, that the fossil industry cannot possibly bounce back without significant additional support to the ones that they already get. And if you were to redirect that towards renewable energy and decentralized, locally based renewable energy that can also create a large number of jobs, which is a potential over there. We can possibly, have this shift, be aligned with the global trend of promoting renewable energy along with energy efficiency, still be plugged into the global supply chains, but at the same time develop businesses that are relevant and services driven from there that are relevant to the local context and the needs of the local context. So that I think is possible. The other thing that comes to mind in listening to also what Katherine was saying was
Leena, I'm sorry, you're breaking. The sound is worse than it was. I'm sorry, it's difficult to follow. Apologies for that. Well, we can't. But I mean, the question of technology, though, takes us perhaps to Gong, and perhaps Gong, you could. I mean, there's one question that I think is coming out that it would be interesting to hear you a little bit more about. And there's in a lot of things that we've heard tonight, a lot of what has been said highlights the necessity of people, of societies to design their pathways towards sustainability. So design pathways make sense to them. Now I know, and you've made that point during your presentation as well, you're a very strong believer in the role of technologies, in particular perhaps in the role of artificial intelligence in moving us towards a desired future. And I'd like to ask you to speak a little bit to a possible tension here, or perhaps not, but between technology-induced change and, say, people's ownership over a transformative process. How would you approach that relationship?
Actually, in this COVID-19 crisis, a lot of technology has been used, especially big data and artificial intelligence has been used for preventing people to be affected, and also used to screening the patients to find out the COVID-19 patient. So, but in the meanwhile, people do worry about the privacy because the data is used everywhere. You know, in China, if you go to a place, you enter into a building, you need to screen a code, and with this code, your behavior is tracked. Where have you been, and if you have contact with someone who is affected a few days ago, and you're followed. So people do worry about the privacy, and how could these data could be used safely. So that's why early today we talk about how to make quickly standard for use of the data, and to make some legislation works, to accelerate the legislation works on data using. So, but we still need technical tools to check whether the data is really properly used, and so on and so forth. So that needs a collaboration between not only multidisciplinary, but only between technical society and government and the NGOs and so on, so forth. We should work together to make the technology, especially the artificial intelligence, to be responsibly used. So that's we have learned from these crises.
From the pandemic, I think, yeah, but that's very interesting. It does ultimately perhaps raise the question of a global data governance mechanism for framing and making sure that we're all on the same, we're all moving into the same direction with when it comes to data privacy and control. Thank you very much, Gong. Shantanu, we can't finish this this discussion without coming back to one comment that you made about how positive in a way for open access to knowledge the crisis has been. Somewhat of a paradox, but indeed the paywalls on articles around COVID have been dropped, and essentially all knowledge we have relevant to COVID has been pretty much, at least published in journals, has been pretty much offered in open access from the first day, which is great. The extent to which that announces greater international collaboration, I think, needs to be questioned, in the sense that we see also, or there are worries at least, that as we move towards economic crisis, that when it comes to the funding of research, the first budgetary line that might be cut are actually international collaboration. And so I think that here there is potentially a tension that might force us into some difficulties. And so I don't know if the question I had for you, Shantanu, and I don't know if you can address that in 1 minute, but was to what extent you feel that the scientific community at this stage is providing the kind of input into the UN system that the SDGs process requires, whether you feel that the scientific community is giving the right kind of input and providing the kind of knowledge that is needed. 1 minute for you.
I think the scientific community does a great job providing a good deal of input to the UN system. I think it's not the input that's the issue, it's the decision making that has to be affected. And I think it's not a question of the scientists not being taken seriously when they speak collectively. I think scientists need to do more to mobilize their member states who make decisions. It's as simple as that. I think, you know, giving a keynote address at the UN is great, like I said, it looks impressive on the CV, but it doesn't change minds the way your advocacy at the ground level would. And we have to understand that the decisions of the UN are influenced a lot by advocacy, which is carried out not just by scientists, but other people on the ground. And that's where I think scientists need to get engaged and persuade the people who will persuade the decision makers. Over.
Great.
Thank you very much, Shantanu. So I must now thank all the speakers, thank all the participants for their questions. I'd like also to thank Anda Popovici, Anne-Sophie Stevens, and Jenya Tsoi for their organization and technical support. Let me wish you all a good day, a good evening, a good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hello.